Welcome to Barnstable Today. I'm Nick Cortez. We're spending this week on the program taking a look back at what was a very eventful town council meeting on Thursday, July 14th. As you know, the meeting was shifted to the night auditorium at Barnstable High School in anticipation of a large crowd, and indeed, over 200 people showed up, and about 40 people spoke during public comment, almost all of whom condemned the 6 council members who voted for a buyout of town manager John Klim's contract while praising the manager's overall performance. We showed you a sampling of those comments earlier this week, so today we turn our attention to the council response to public comment. We'll start with remarks from Councillor James Crocker, who many believe has led the group of 6 in the effort to buy out the manager. Here, Crocker gives his side of the story.
I think through the whole process, it was my full belief that when I got elected 8 years ago, that I went to John as the very first person I spoke to after winning the election. And I said, John, we got to figure out a way that we can work together. And that was my very first mission after being elected. And John and I agreed to pick up the phone and talk to each other whenever it was appropriate, whenever we had a problem, so that we didn't undermine the issue, so that we didn't undermine the integrity of this office, so that we had honest discussions, and so that he understood. When I called John in March and asked if I could speak to him, I told him that I thought I needed change in his office. I had not told any of the 6, I had not told any of the 13, I had not told anybody. I went to John as per our agreement, and as per the agreement both of us have shared for 8 years, and told him of my feelings. This is nothing that came from the dark. This is nothing but an execution of an effort between discussions, thoughtful discussions, and then a decision by the manager and the president to allow the scheduling to occur. That's how we got to this place. And if you think it's anything else, you're absolutely wrong. I'll just tell you that emphatically. This can't be deemed a termination because we don't have the right to solve this problem. There's a pending offer out there that only John can accept. You don't have terminations where the individual has the right to decide whether to accept it or not. This is a negotiated settlement to the contract that's out there. And if he doesn't want it, I'm comfortable to take that and run with it. And I've asked several times if he signed it, because we don't know if it's been signed, or if he doesn't want it, but we can't get a response to that. The moment we start talking about it, and we have been baited here up on the dais as other places to speak to it, the first thing that comes is this little email that you see that says I've retained the services of a legal individual, which is absolutely sensible in personnel matters. Meanwhile, it's posted in the papers. It's ludicrous to think we can't talk about these things. And the very next thing that comes is the lawyer's letter that says if you talk about it, we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. And when we're up here acting in this, that means we're putting taxpayer money at risk. Yet we were baited time and time again to discuss it. I took it upon myself, because I'm unclear as to everything as it occurred, or whether or not this is just remorse, to bring forward a motion that says, let's vote it, because all of us weren't there. And yet I was notified today by the administrator that the council president won't allow that to come forward, even though we know this room is full of people who are asking for it. So I brought it forward last Friday. And here it is Thursday, and we're not going to discuss it tonight, is what I've been told. So again, I will ask when we come to the orders of the day if we can revisit this as a late order and solve the problem for you people for once and for all. And if that's not honesty, integrity, bringing it forward, resolving the problem, trying to get things to a head, then I'm sorry, I can't do a whole lot more for you.
As you may remember, Councillor John Norman was the only one of the 6 councillors who voted for the buyout to speak on the night that the vote was actually cast. He had more to add this past Thursday, and here's some of what he had to say.
This notion that somehow this was some sort of cabal cooked up by 6 people without the condonement of at least a majority of this council, you're fooling yourself. Now, this committee that was formed to look into writing up an amendment to the existing contract of the manager was formed at the direction of the president of the council, who's pro tem. That means he could have said no, and the issue would have died right then and there. But the committee was formed, and it was made up of 4 councilors. It came out of committee with a 3-to-1 vote. So you have to ask yourself, if it was 2-to-2, it was a tie and it would have died and never come out of committee. But it came out of committee because one person voted for the amendment to come out of committee and be pushed into executive session because it's a personnel matter and it had to be reviewed there first. Then it went into executive session. Again, I asked, same thing as Mr. Monifo, how can 6 overcome 13? It's not a majority, is it? But when quorum is broken, or quorum is not achieved, then 6 can. So it comes out of committee, out of executive session, for public hearing. The public hearing was set by the president on a special meeting, and everyone who serves as a counselor was given due notice of when that meeting was going to take place and what item was going to be discussed. Just like the inquiry that was asked for, to form under our charter an inquiry into some of the allegations that have been made. And that night, that vote, people were in full attendance. 13 came out. It actually was moved from the agenda list to the first item to be spoken, so that a particular member could vote and then go home because he felt very sick. So they came in force to shut down an inquiry for openness, to let the public know what's going on and what we wanted the answers for. Then it went to this special hearing night, and yes, a motion was made to postpone it until the full council could be there. And it did not pass because they did not have the numbers. Now, at that point, there was only 2 items on the agenda that night. One was the solar subcommittee, and one was the amendment. At that point, if 3 people walk out, quorum is broken, and the meeting ends right then and there, and any agenda items automatically get moved to the next meeting. So what you want us to believe, and what you have to believe and understand, is that somehow 6 overcame 5. Of that 5, there are 3 attorneys, someone with a doctorate in education, and a certified teacher in the state of Massachusetts. But somehow, that night, none of them knew how to count.
The final counselor to speak during response to public comment was Council President Fred Chirigotis. Chirigotis had some strong words in response to the comments you've already heard from Councilors Crocker and Norman. Have a listen.
Let's look at what we really have. The councilors who are complaining that I didn't use some political process to stop them. First of all, there was a vote to postpone. They voted 6-5 not to postpone. There was a vote to table the item. There was a vote 6-5 not to table the item. And now it's my fault that I didn't stop them. You know, I heard something earlier about like a teenager who gets caught and then they berate you because they're angry that they were caught. It's kind of like the spoiled brat whose hand is in the cookie jar. He's mad at you that you didn't hide the cookie jar on him. You let me do this. You didn't stop me. It's your fault. Well, it's not my fault. And you've heard that this is a process that has been in place a lot longer than 1 or 2 weeks. This is a process when, in early March, a counselor, by his own admission, I think it's been in the newspaper at least once, drove over and told the town manager, let's go for a ride, took him in his car, drove him, and said, you're all done. Pack your bags, I got the votes. So let's talk about what is right and what is real. Who's bullying who? And are the people of the town of Barnstable going to take it? That is the truth. The truth of the matter is that people have acted with their own agenda, and now they have to accept the consequences of their own actions. Now, I agree. I heard earlier, I've heard a couple of times that there is a proffered contract to the town manager. My brief understanding of contract law from, what I've heard is that you have an offer and you have an acceptance. And until you have an acceptance, the contract isn't final. There is actually a contract already in place, so there's no amendment to it that's official. However, once you make the offer, you have an obligation to allow the person you've made that offer an opportunity to review it and make their own response. They may accept the offer, they may reject the offer, or they may counteroffer. Okay, so an offer has been made. We don't know the response yet. There are a whole list of responses. I would suggest, and I've heard it said tonight, that the appropriate way to handle that would be to ask that the response to that contract be made on or about November the 15th. And the reason for that is all of this stuff is not about the contract. We've heard John Klim doesn't have to sign a contract. We want to withdraw our offer. We want to do all those. Actually, the most interesting thing I heard tonight was a counselor down the end say, you don't have to sign it. You can let the chips fall where they may, which is interesting language considering there's a voicemail from another counselor who said exactly that to the town manager last week in a voicemail. You don't have to sign it. Let the chips fall where they may. Is that a threat? Yeah, is someone walking around with a target on his back? The reality of it is that people need to be upfront. The reality of it is that people need to be accountable for their actions and for their own conduct, and they need to tell the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the conduct before you has been reprehensible. I'm offended and I apologize to everybody, really. If anyone in the town of Barnstable had heard, except for maybe four, I think there were 4, maybe 5 people who had an issue, but let's look at the newspaper reports, radio reports, television the last 10 years. Have you heard the scuttlebutt around town? Have you heard the rumors that we need to get rid of this guy, that there's something wrong? Do you know a single story, a single rumor? None. The problem is who's telling the truth and who's telling their version of the truth. Now, the reality of it is it's not about the contract, it's about the environment. Can any individual, can the town manager continue in what I would suggest, and I heard a few people who were union members and represented state and municipal employees and educators, and I've heard terms like hostile work environment. I've heard, can an individual continue to work with the threat of let the chips fall where they may? Is that right? Is it fair? Is it reasonable? What do we expect? So I don't know what the answer is, but I suggest that whether you make the offer, you withdraw the offer, the lines have been drawn. The atmosphere has been created. Actually, I do know what the effect is. Something, the voters are going to speak in November. The voters are going to speak in November, and they're going to let people know whether or not they think this is exactly a good way to move forward with the town of Barnstable or not. And we'll all live with that.
After council response to public comment was completed, Manager Klim was given an opportunity to tell his own side of the story. What followed was a speech that you'll hear tomorrow on Barnstable Today as we continue our review of last week's town council meeting. Until then, we'll leave you with a look at this week's meetings. I'm Nick Cortez, and we'll see you next time.